want, want to introduce Mallory from Cork, Ireland. Yay.
Thanks, Glenn. Thank you, Glenn. I'm Mallory. I'm an alcoholic. Thank you so much, Glenn, for asking me to be here today. I'm going to turn it on gallery view so I can see all of y'all. My sobriety date is October 23rd, 2013. I have a sponsor, and my sponsor has a sponsor. And my home group is the Carrick Tool Big Book Step group here in Cork, Ireland. I'm originally from Los Angeles, hence the accent. But I've lived here for about 5 years, and my sponsor is here and my grand sponsor is in California. So like I do feel a bit, and especially with a lot of meetings that I go to online. So like I do feel a bit a part of an international AA family. And I really like to welcome newcomers, anyone who's new or feeling new, and happy birthday to everyone. There was a lot of birthdays, so I can't remember them, but congratulations to everyone. I wanted to talk about service today because I so rarely get asked to speak on a specific topic, and that's, for me, what I like to talk about, what I have a lot of experience in. And, I think aside from workshops or conventions or special things like that, it's something that, at least where I'm from, is not talked about enough. And, I think it's so important to talk about, especially for, people who are new to AA or who, maybe are interested in service but haven't done a lot of it. So that's what I'm going to talk about today as much as possible. And I'll kind of start, before I got sober. Like I come from a family where, everything is about kind of self-pity and self-centeredness. And both my parents are alcoholics who were in recovery, but like my home was one of dysfunction. And, I learned at a very young age, how to isolate and how to be inside myself and how to, I guess in AA, like we say, run the show. Like that's what I know how to do best. And I learned that from, my home life. I didn't really see any other examples of anything else. And, I thought that was normal to some extent. There are a lot of things in my house that I knew were not normal, but that was not one of them, and that made, even as a child functioning in the world, very, very difficult, because a very angry child, had a really hard time talking to people and making friends. And again, part of that was because the example that was set at home for me was not there. Like my parents did not have friends. There was too much of like a dysfunctional environment for me to have people over at the house. So, like I know it's really common for alcoholics to, feel like an outsider or, be really isolated. And that was definitely the case for me as well. And I started, from a really young age, like retreating more and more before I found drugs and alcohol. And then when I did find drugs and alcohol, like to some extent it was social, but, mostly for me, like I was seeking an escape from the pain of what was going on in my home life. And, just this feeling in myself that like I didn't, I wasn't like other people. I really felt self-conscious about myself and my ability to be like other people. And I didn't have any solution for that, and being an American, like, one of the things that of course is suggested, it was like to go to therapy. So like I had seen like a school psychologist fairly regularly from the time I was about 12 or 13. And, I found that helped a little bit, but like it never got at the root of my problems the way that AA has. And, when I started drinking and taking drugs, like it very quickly got out of control. And like, my teachers and my parents and, other school employees were involved in trying to, get me to stop. And my response was always, that if what's happening at home changes, then I won't have any reason to do this. But of course, that wasn't something that my teachers could change. And it's not something that my parents could even change, because they're, powerless over their own behavior and not really seeking, any solution to that. And that's not my business. Um, so I just felt, justified in what I was doing. And I felt righteous, that, the adults were all wrong, and again, like that pattern of, I know best, I'm going to run the show, fuck the rest of you guys. um, and I eventually was in so much pain that I'd done a geographical, I come back to LA, and I was in so much pain that I was like, okay, I'll go to AA. And I didn't even really think I was an alcoholic, because like I could count on 2 or 3 hands the amount of times that I actually drank, because alcohol was not my primary substance of choice, because I got sober before the legal drinking age and I could never get a hold of alcohol. And I didn't identify in AA. I didn't identify anywhere completely, really. But then, I found in the big book that, like, the 2 qualifiers for alcoholism is, an obsession, a problem centering the mind, and then, oh God, my mind's gone blank. Jesus Christ. An allergy and an obsession. So an allergy to alcohol, when I take first drink, like, I lose control of my drinking. And despite the few number of times that I had drank, I qualified, like, I could check both of those boxes. And I found that very interesting, that it took years for me to actually see, oh yes, that's true for me. But once I did, like, there's no going back from that. Once I saw that on paper in the book and with a sponsor in front of me, I couldn't say, well, that means nothing. I now officially qualify as an alcoholic in Alcoholics Anonymous. I just want to say I just gave birth to twins a couple months ago, and I'm a little bit spacey, and I was yawning before the meeting, and I'm chronically exhausted. So I apologize for any, if I seem a little bit all over the place. My husband is so kind to take both of the babies while I could speak on the meeting, which is so nice of him. It's so nice to just, like, not have a baby in my arms, just to be in my own body. So, like I said, I came into AA when I was 20. I hated it, like, hated it here. I didn't want to be an alcoholic. Like, it wasn't anything about AA. My parents had brought me to meetings when I was a child, and I came to AA because I knew it was a safe place, but I just didn't think that it was for me. And I immediately took up a service commitment, because I wanted to help. I had this innate thing in me of, I want to be of service, and I didn't know that at the time, but that's what was driving me. That feeling that I get when I'm of service. But that's, what ended up happening to me. And I got a sponsor straight away, after having resisted, many, many months of resisting before I got sober, when I was kind of had my toe in AA. But once I was ready to get sober, I was like, okay, sponsor, like, say that I'm a newcomer, all of that. And, my first sponsor took me through the book. We met once a week at her house, and I really struggled, like, the only thing that I was consistent with was service. Like, service kept me coming back, and I can't explain why, but, I love showing up at the door and greeting, or I love, like, putting the chairs out, and and then I got encouraged into being a secretary and finding speakers. And like I said, I had a really hard time, like, talking to people. I didn't know how to talk to people, which is hard in AA, because everyone wants to talk to you, especially if you're new. And I'm like, get away from me. Um, and I thought that I had like social anxiety disorder. Like I thought that I had like a legitimate mental illness that prevented me from interacting with people. But as I continue to stay sober and again, like continue to do types of service that involve, being involved with a lot of people like secretary, finding speakers and stuff like that, what I actually found is like, I didn't have the tools to be social in the way that I want to. And like, I'm quite extroverted. And I remember my first sponsor, she asked me to house sit for her a couple times. And like I would spend the weekend by myself at her house, unable to leave, like unable to call anyone, unable to go to a meeting, because I was completely in my head and my thinking had all of the power. And like I had no God at that time because despite, having a sponsor and going to the meetings and going through the book and all of that, like I could not let anything in that way. I was not capable. Like I could only do the little bits that I could do. And, in hindsight, um, that's the way that it had to be for me. Because when I moved to Ireland 5 years ago, like I was still in that place. My alcoholism was getting worse and worse, even though I was sober, which is how I know that I'm a, real alcoholic. Because I put the drink down and like everything just gets worse for me without the 12 steps and without a sponsor and without the fellowship. And I came here and I found out pretty quickly that we don't have specialist meetings in this country in our service structure. So like you cannot list a women's or a men's meeting or young person's meeting. And I just thought that was ridiculous. And I had not been involved in general service up until that point because I got sober in San Francisco and I found that very overwhelming. Like I didn't know what a GSR was. I didn't know what area was. I didn't know that there was a service structure. I kind of barely knew what group conscience was. Like I would attend business meetings, but I didn't really understand like the function of the group. And I was all riled up, even though I didn't want to go to young people's meetings back in San Francisco because I didn't know how to talk to people my own age, really. But I moved to Ireland and somehow, something in me was ready. And I think I don't know, 24 at the time. And I started, asking questions and looking at our service manual and learning about our structure. So we have in a like an upside down triangle and the groups have all of the power. Like the groups get to dictate what happens in AA. And like we're reading the preamble there and that's it's a great example of how that works. So the preamble used to read men and women and now it reads people. And that's because a group put forward a motion that went through the structure and got discussed at many levels. And then that passed at the conference level. And here in Ireland, like we're doing the same thing. Like, do we want our preamble to change? So I started, feeling very hungry for that kind of education, about how AA actually works. And meanwhile, my alcoholism was still getting worse. And so I was, going to meetings as a young American woman, American here meaning very opinionated. That's how like people outside of America kind of see Americans. And I would have been certainly an example of that, going to meetings kind of at group conscience, starting arguments or debates about, we shouldn't be doing this, we should be doing this. I was boycotting meetings because they weren't talking about the steps, and the whole time it was like I did not have a solution, but I did a lot of service. I think I had like 8 service commitments at one point, and that was how things went until I met my current sponsor, June. And, what she said to me was like, when I asked her to be my sponsor, she said, you know God in your life, like your thinking is your God. And, I can help you with that. And I was appalled at what she was saying because at the time, like my thinking was my solution. Um, I completely depended on my thinking to inform my decisions, but the problem was that it didn't really work that well. If I had a problem, I would think about it and I would often go in circles and circles and circles. And I had no other source of information, until my sponsor, introduced me to prayer, which, most of the people in AA had been using. But to me, it was like this revelation because of the way that she presented it to me, you know, praying to see the truth. So I now had this new source of information where like, I would have a problem and I would ask God to show me what to do, or I would ask God to show me the truth about, like what's going on here. And I would get this information that did not come from my thinking, because I'm very familiar what things feel like when they come from my thinking, when they come from me. And it wasn't that, it was something different, And, that was a game changer for me, because up until this point, my sponsor described to me, if I'm in self-will, like I can't really be of service. If I'm doing things in a way that is trying to, brute force things, like that's not service. Doing service means that I do it with love and I do it with gentleness. And, I started making an attempt to do things in this way because I was tired of being angry. Like I think one of the first things on my fourth step with June was like, I'm angry at conference because, they don't do things right. Like they just don't do it right. They don't know what they're talking about. It's a bunch of like old people who just are very stuck in their ways, And she said to me, well, you want conference to change and you go to conference. And that's not something that I have done yet. Like I currently serve my home group as a GSR. And here, we don't have district because Ireland is a lot smaller than the United States. So we don't have that level. But like, I've served at area and that's hard work. And I have so much respect for our delegates and for our intergroup representatives and everyone who serves in general service, because it is hard work to just show up to the meeting and learn how to interact with people, and for me, that's where God has to come in. Like before every area meeting, I pray that, God helps me to keep my mouth shut unless I absolutely need to say something. And I'm still getting, I'm still getting there. It's still hard for me to not come in, when it's not necessary. Especially like lately, the last couple of meetings, and I've been sleep deprived, and I'm not as able to receive my higher powers guidance. And at least, that's how it feels, and I'm quicker to kind of go off of whatever I think in the moment, instead of taking that pause. Like it's harder for me to take that pause at the moment. Um, and what I wanted to talk about a little bit as well was that through this new sponsorship that I started receiving, my sponsor takes her sponsees through the book, through the steps, through the book, and then through the traditions and then the concepts. So she took me through the traditions, and then, when everything kind of went online, I got the opportunity to go through the concepts with my grant sponsor and like with a large group of people. And, what I found, like going through the steps, the experience of going through the book, I got to see who I really was. Like, oh, sorry about that. I got to see, that I was a very aggressive person. Like I was a very abusive person in my intimate relationships. But I didn't know that that's what it was. Like I didn't have a word for it. There's a lot of dysfunction in how I behaved, but because it was subtle, I didn't realize until I did a proper fourth and fifth step and continued to take inventory and continued to look at step 6 and 7. I found that I also have this really amazing capacity for gentleness and for love. And I have this curiosity and this desire to learn and um, to take guidance. Like for me, the steps, the traditions, and the concepts are, and this is only for me, the way that I use them, but it's for me, it's tempering. It gives me these guidelines because I really need that. Like left to my own devices, I do a lot of harm to myself and others, and I don't want to do that. And what I loved about going through the traditions was like there's some questions that the were put out in the grapevine. I think during this 1970s, that Bill Wilson had kind of written a bunch of questions, and then they were put out periodically for I can't remember if they were originally for group or for individual use, but it was for one of those things. And like it's all about how I behave in the group and how can I apply those things to my home life. So, when I show up to group conscience, how am I? When I show up to my group in general, how am I? Am I saying things that are kind of derisive? Do I welcome the newcomer? Do I show up early and leave late? Um, am I educated about how to practice like our seventh tradition? Like, do I know how to be self-supporting both in the group and in my home life? Like lots of those things come into play when I do service. Like, the traditions are super important for that. I'm thinking specifically of like a situation we have here in Ireland, which is kind of becoming a nationwide issue where for whatever reason in Ireland, the buildings need to, they don't insure themselves. So if you're an AA group and you're at a building, it's the meeting's responsibility to get insurance. And what's happened is there's an insurance company who has said, hey, we're going to offer you a super cheap rate. And any group that wants to can sign up for this. And you just need someone to liaise with the insurance company to pay that money. And what's happened is, the area committees have, paid. And then the next year, the groups who paid before didn't show up to area. And they think that they're still going to get insured, but they don't have anyone bring the money. And there's this big discussion about, do we pay for those groups and let them be insured, or do we just pay for the groups that give us the money? And to me, it's like a fairly obvious thing of like tradition 7, like a group cannot be insured if they do not pay for their insurance. Like we can't be chasing groups around. But at the group and at the area level, it's a huge discussion at the moment. And for me, it all comes down to this education about the traditions. Like if everyone kind of knew about the traditions, maybe our discussions would be a little bit more brief. But that's only my opinion, and it comes from a point of frustration of, being at area meetings for hours and hours and having the same discussions over and over again, and like my takeaway from that is I have a responsibility to pass this information on to my sponsees. That's all that I can do. I can't show up to a group or show up to a group conscience or show up to area or whatever it might be, whatever committee I might be doing service at, and expect other people to change in a way that makes me more comfortable, which is always my MO, in my 4th step. That's what I found is like, I would love if everyone else could change so that I'm more comfortable, because I don't know how to deal with people doing things that I don't like. Like I had no solution for that. And, just to briefly touch on the concepts, like, again, for practice in the group and for practice at my home life, I'll mention like maybe one of them, right of participation. So, when I show up to group conscience and it's my home group and we take a vote, I get a vote. When we need to make a decision, we all talk about things. We all participate in what needs to be talked about, And I love that. And I love that, like, I was at a conference a few months ago where a woman was speaking about how she practices the concepts in her personal life. And she was saying how, like, she has like a very like complicated family life, where it's like it's kind of, they're in multiple countries, and it's um, like there's step parents and stuff like that. And she was saying how, like, culturally something happened because of a cultural reason where, like, she wasn't included in the decision or the conversation about something. And she was saying, hey, this concept about right of participation, like, came up for her, that she wanted to be involved in that, and that she had the right to, in order for, this decision to be made between the family, and that she felt that that crossed, that right of participation should have transcended the cultural differences. And I found that so interesting. Like, I'm not at the point yet where I can apply the concepts in my personal life, because I'm not involved. I'm not using them all that much and not talking about them all that much, which is why I like to try to speak about it, so that I can learn more about, what does this mean for my personal life. Um, and I guess the last thing I want to touch on is sponsorship. Um, for me, it's been so important to have a sponsor who, I can ask service questions of, who, is available to take me through all three legacies, and who does service themselves. Like, my sponsor serves at the intergroup level. I don't know what that is in America. I know that it's the group and then district and then area, but I don't know what's after area. I don't know if it's conference, but we have a level between area and conference. And she's at the intergroup level, and I see her in service, and I see her do like greeter, tea and coffee, like at the home group level as well. And I see her in group conscience, and you know, I see her set an example for me of, her gentleness, um, how she conducts herself, how she says things that sometimes no one else wants to say, and she delivers it with love. How, she stays after the meeting to do 12-step calls, like a lot of her sponsees and we all go to this one group, a lot of us. And when June does a 12-step call, it's special because she has more experience than all of us, probably all of us combined, and to get to see how she does things, how she approaches a newcomer. I saw her say to someone one time, they were saying, oh, this is all my problems in my life and blah, blah, this is why I can't, make meetings and all this stuff. And she said, well, that's just life. And I had previously worked with this person, like they'd previously been my sponsee, and I had pretty much said the same thing to her, but when I said it to her, she didn't hear it. But when June said it to her, she really heard it. I could see it, and it's so special to have that relationship with someone. Like, I hear people say, if you don't think your home group is the best group, then you need a different home group. Or like, if you don't think your sponsor is the best sponsor, then you need a different sponsor. And that's how I feel, but I never say that to anyone. I don't tell anyone that. But for other people who say that, that's definitely been my experience. Um, my sponsor, we go hand in hand in how we do this service work in my AA life and in my personal life. She shows me how to be of service in my home. When we talk, like, she reminds me, am I thinking about my husband? Because it's so easy for me to, at any stage of my life, like having babies or not, always be thinking about myself. And, I need that reminder from a person, as well as, from the literature to, get out of myself and be of service in my home life, in whatever I'm doing. And I don't think I have anything else to say. I'm really grateful to be here. I'm really looking forward to hearing some of y'all. And yeah, thanks for letting me speak.